Glass Lion, that is a lovely sentence to read. Glass Lion just wrote, my whole personality used to be getting casually outraged about stuff, but I realized it was I was doing it and how exhausted it made me. It was draining. Some people do bond over complaining. I mean, we're doing it now. People bond over complaining. There's a human element to bonding over that. A very understandable human element to bonding over a level of complaint. Misery loves company. Hatred gets shared more than anything else does. But sometimes you have to understand that the amount of stuff that you are told... You know something I find draining? Let me tell you a pet peeve of mine. Have you ever had a conversation with someone? That's the pet peeve. That's the whole sentence. No, it gets more complicated. Have you ever had a conversation with someone and you've told them about something you dislike? And what they've done is they've gone with the whataboutism. And they've gone, oh, you hate this. Well, what about this? And they've mentioned something else. And you're like, yeah, you hate that too. And you're like, well, what about this? And you're like, yeah, you hate that too. Well, what about this? Yeah, that's also bad. What about having a conversation with something you say, yeah, this is bad. And they go, oh, that's bad, but what about this? By the end of that conversation, all you've done is discovered hundreds of things that you need to be equally angry about. And that's just going to make everyone sad. Because I say to people that you only have a limited amount of hatred, of energy per day. Don't just waste it on being angry at absolutely bloody everything. Whenever I have this conversation and I say something like, I mean, I talk about gaming a lot, obviously, and I'll say to people, you know, hey, I'm going to work with this company. And they're like, oh, but don't you hate them because they've done this and this and this and this and this? I'm like, okay, well, now I need to be angry and annoyed, but they've also done this, this and this. Conversations with some people just end making you feel bad that you aren't annoyed enough. That's what it is. Have you ever had a conversation with someone that has ended and you've almost felt like there's so much stuff that person wants you to be angry at and annoyed at that you just don't have the mental energy, you don't have the bandwidth to be that annoyed? And when I say to someone, people hate it when you turn around and go, okay, you know what, look, at this point, I'm sure that's bad, but I just don't care. They're like, oh, you've got to care. You've got to care. P-Shooter says, then why not address it? Because, P-Shooter, what you don't understand is that if you say, hey, I don't like this, and someone goes, well, don't you like this either? It just becomes this endless domino effect of having to be constantly annoyed, constantly angry at everything. And people think that you're heartless when you say, look, I just straight up do not have the energy needed to care deeply about all of these things. It's okay to say that you're going to kind of divide what you do or don't care about. People say not caring is... Hang on. No caring is basically supporting. Do you believe that? Do you believe if someone tells me something is bad and I go, I don't care about that? What they hear is, I support that. Human beings have been exposed to more information, more situations, more communication now than they ever have in history. And we are expected to be able to emotionally regulate hatred on a global scale. A scale that is absurd, that human beings were just not meant to be able to deal with. We are expected to be able to be aware of every negative thing in the world at any given moment and not let it overwhelm us. We are expected to care deeply about every injustice. And if you don't care as deeply as someone else does about their specific injustice, then you are supporting the injustice. And the truth is, caring that deeply about that many things is just straight up insanity. If you were to sit a human being down and make them aware of absolutely everything going on in the world at all times ever, that person would go mad. And unfortunately, some people are willingly trying to do this to themselves. Which is why I think, as harsh as it sounds, it's okay to pick and choose what you want to spend your limited mental bandwidth caring about. P-Shooter says, Josh, but at some point, do you not want to at least want things to make things better? P-Shooter, what are you hearing when I'm saying that there is a limited amount of stuff you can care about? Genuinely, what are you hearing me say? Because what you've said is, I've said people expect you to care about everything and it's overwhelming. And then you've responded with, but at some point, don't you want to attempt to make things better? Yes, I do. I absolutely do want to make things better. But is driving myself insane, caring about everything in the world, actually making things better? Is me being upset and angry and annoyed actually making things better? Human beings were not designed to live in such a massive connected culture. We can try, pea shooter, we can try. But you have to understand that the most effective effort is not done on a global scale. It's done on a smaller, focused scale. Individual acts of kindness, individual acts of focus, smaller scale, collective community, groups of processes that we do together. It is about slowly working out what things we can do to efficiently change, not burning ourselves mentally out by worrying about everything at the same time. Choosing one process to get right is better than choosing 100 to simply have nightmares about. And so when I say to someone, there are 1,000 things going wrong right now, and I cannot care about all 1,000, but I can care about this, then I will do that. Pea Shooter says, so let's do it. Do you not think we are, Pea Shooter? Do you think I'm sat here saying, it's all worthless, don't even bother? That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that worrying about everything at the same time isn't productive. The problem is sometimes I think I don't mind people who are idealistic. I love people who are idealistic. But you need to balance being idealistic and realistic at the same time. Because I think, unfortunately, I like to encourage people to keep doing it. Okay, pea shooter, if someone comes up to you and says they're trying to solve 1,000 problems at once and they're making no progress in all of them, what would your advice be to them? Someone comes up to you and says, look, there's 1,000 things going wrong. I need to fix all of them. I can't fix any of them. I'm overwhelmed. There's too much stuff going on. What are we doing? Would you say to them, choose 1 or 2 things that you can actually fix? Fix things that you can. Try something new or work with others. Yeah, but what if that person, pea shooter, then turns around to you and says, yeah, but I've got to focus on all 1,000. I've got to do this. I understand that you have this very simple view right now of we must try. I agree, we must try. But just trying isn't enough. We need an actual process. We need an actual idea. We need a plan. And working out what that plan is more beneficial than just hoping. Is worrying about everything being too empathetic? Worrying about everything, if it is hindering your ability to fix things, is of course useless. You don't know what we disagree on. Pea shooter, what we disagree on is the fact that I find it rather naive that your attitude is just everyone should try and fix everything all the time. Sounds like it's coming from someone who hasn't had to deal with critical situations that require critical thinking. That's a way of looking at it. And people also say, wait till you have kids, then you'll know multitasking. Lots of experiences require multitasking, not just having children. I'm sure that having children is a difficult thing to do because every time I've spoken to someone that has children, they decide to compete in the suffering Olympics and tell me exactly how difficult everything is. And they go, oh, when you have kids, it's going to be so much harder, which has made me go, okay, you know what? I won't have kids. That sounds easier. Every single parent has done their absolute best to tell me why I should never have children. And when I turn around and go, you know what? You're probably right. They all go, oh, but you need to do that. It's so rewarding. Really? You haven't told me that. You haven't sat there and said it's so rewarding. You've told me how tired and awful everything is. Oh, it's so awful. I'm so tired. Everything's so bad. Everything's multitasking all the time. Everything's terrible. Oh, never have kids. Okay, cool, done. There you go. Simple. They've convinced me not to, and I'm fully on board with that. How do I feel about the social expectation to have kids in order to be successful? When I was a child, every single adult told me that I could grow up and do whatever I wanted. They told me that I could grow up and experience the world. When I was a child, most of the adults in my life were remarkably supportive, and they kept telling me how I was destined for these amazing things and I could do stuff if I put my mind to it, and they would support me. And I was very young and I was very privileged and I was very lucky to have so many people tell me that I could do all this stuff. And when I decided on the stuff that I wanted to do, they were very supportive. But as soon as they realized the stuff I wanted to do involved not having kids, suddenly they got a lot less supportive. And I'm thinking, hang on, no, you can't do this. You can't be there telling me that I can do all of these amazing things. And then when I say, hey, I'm going to go and do all of these amazing things, they turn around and go, yeah, but you really shouldn't. You really shouldn't do those things. You really should just be having kids. Okay, if you want to have kids, go for it. I don't. I was raised with adults telling me I can go and do all this awesome, cool stuff. And you know what? I kind of believed them. So I said, I'm going to go and do all this awesome, cool stuff. And they're like, yeah, you've got to have kids. You've got to do it. If you want to have kids, you go for it. My bloodline ends with, I was going to say me, but that's not true. I've got a brother. He'll have kids. I'll be a cool uncle. That works. I'm happy to be the cool uncle. It's okay, Josh. You can still change your opinion. You know what's amazing is every time you tell someone something that you have pretty much set, they always go, you'll change your mind. Don't worry. It'll change in the future. As if what they're actually saying to you is, hey, I know you better than you know you. I know you think you want this right now, but you don't. You don't actually want... What you actually want is what I want for you. Not what you want for you. Because you're just foolish and silly. I say, hey, I don't want kids. And someone goes, you will in the future. No. No, I won't. Oh, but you might. No. Isn't it weird that you don't do it the other way around? If someone goes, I want kids, you don't go, you'll regret having them in the future. Like, you'd be insulted if somebody said that to you. You say it the other way around, it's totally insulting. But it's totally fine to do it this way. I say to someone, you're having a baby? They're like, yeah. I'm like, what a terrible choice. Oh, what a terrible... enjoy all of your money and free time now while it lasts. Oh, I'll text you at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when I'm doing nothing and you're busy changing nappies. Oh, then you'll regret it. People seem to have this idea that if you say, I don't want to do this, it's fine for them to turn around and go, you'll change your mind in the future. Even if I do, I find it really, really patronizing. That's the first thing that you come back with instead of just, that's your choice. Excellent. Good. I'm glad that you've chosen that. Hi, Josh. Thinking of starting a teaching assistant position. Congratulations. Little unconventional, need the help. Any tips for creating comfortable classroom learning environments? The children want structure. The children want structure and they want to be respected, but not worshipped or bowed down to. How you treat the children will tell them how they treat you. If you treat them with a level of directness, a level of respect that is not sycophantic, a level of understanding, and a level of expectations that themselves have consequences, and very, very, very importantly, if you make a mistake, admit it. That does not make you look weak, it makes you look human and real. Many people don't know how to say it, but they think you would be a good parent, which is why they insist on it. I think I would be an amazing parent if, this is important, I wanted to be, which I don't. I think if I was able to say I'm going to dedicate myself to fatherhood, I think I would be good at it. But I don't want to do that. I don't want to give up the things in my life that I would be required to give up to be a good father, which is why I know that if I wanted to do that, I would end up missing and resenting aspects of that. And so I would simply rather not put myself in that position. And if people want to turn around and call me heartless for whatever reason for that, that's fine. They're welcome to say that. But I would rather do what I know I'm going to be good at. Because the alternate choice is that I follow what the society tells me that it needs and wants from me, and I end up not doing the best thing for any kind of possible child. And the level is, I know that on some level I am selfish. I know that. I know that I want my free time. I know that I want stuff to do. I want games to play. And the fact that I know that and admit that and I'm comfortable with that means that I need to work out what I'm going to spend my time doing. What would you have to give up if you had kids? Time and money, both of which I like having. I think it would be difficult of me to spend 12 hours playing World of Warcraft a day. I think it would be difficult of me to be able to leave the house whenever I wanted to. I think it would be difficult of me to decide to travel internationally if I wanted to. I would lose a great deal of freedom within the day-to-day that I was having. And I simply look at that and go, I don't want to give that up. And if people say that's selfish, that's fine. When I was a child, people told me that I could do whatever I wanted to do. And this is what I want to do. And so I am doing this. There we go. Okay, well, I guess all I want to say is I really appreciate the commentary and enjoy the streams, and if I misunderstood any of it, I'll give them clarification. The problem is, P, that what I've said was people should care less about stuff if it overwhelms them, and your very first input was, so people just shouldn't care. You've gone to the other extreme of the argument. People often jump in with, so what you're saying is, and then like a kind of disingenuous version of what I've said. Best teachers and professors, those who love the topic they're teaching, absolutely, spot on. Having no free time was why you had to do that, couldn't keep up with the grind, yeah. If you say this thing, people will, they'll come at you. It's true. And then people immediately attack me with it, straight away. This is harder than I would think to just be nice. Pete, you're well-intentioned. What you have to understand is that I have thousands of people every day coming at me with just a little bit of, yeah, but what about this? Yeah, but are you thinking about this? But have you considered this? But why don't we just do that? But, so what you're saying is this, but maybe you should do that instead. But, okay, so, well, maybe we should just try. But that's not the right way to do things. Thousands of people every day with just a little bit of input of, yeah, but have you considered this? But have you done that? But have you done that? Imagine having the same conversation thousands of times a day. And every time you say something of, hey guys, maybe we actually care about too much stuff, someone comes at you with, yeah, but maybe we need to care about this much stuff. Maybe we should just fix things. Maybe we should support things. Yes, I have considered that. And what I'm saying is, the best way to fix these problems is to focus on what we can fix. I'm not saying that you're not bringing good intentions to the stream. I'm saying that you are one of thousands of people that have brought the same, but what if we just do this question. And eventually answering the, but what if we just do this, gets kind of draining. So I'm just going to start saying, you know what? Maybe we should just let you guys do that. Josh, my man, you are talking to some teenagers, maybe giving out too much energy. Yeah, but the teenagers otherwise just feel not listened to. And I remember when I was a well-intentioned teenager, and I thought if people were ignoring me, then they were just being remarkably rude. And I would not like to be that. People who are ideologically focused on doing the right thing don't deserve to be ignored. But they do necessarily need to understand that they are not the only person who is focused on doing the right thing. If you go to any university campus, you will meet hundreds of people who are ideologically attempting to do the right thing. And all of them will think that whatever they are focusing on is the most important thing to focus on. And if you do not focus on the thing that they are focused on with the same fervor that they are focused on, you clearly do not care. And it can get quite draining to have to match people's energy on every topic. Adults normally simply do not have the amount of time required to be as active as they would like to be in any of those situations. You have a limited amount of time, energy, and money. Giving the time, energy, and money to situations that you can actually affect is much more important than giving all of it performatively to situations you cannot affect but need other people to know that you care about. That's a great way of putting it. There's a difference between I don't care and I don't want to talk about this right now. It's possible to care while also knowing you can do nothing. As horrible as that sounds, if someone says, do you not care about this bad thing? What do you want me to say? I can say, like, I don't like the idea of the bad thing. I don't like the sound of it. But as far as caring, how much energy do you want me to put into this? It's a limited amount of time and resources. People tend to care about the massive global things going on without worrying or understanding what's going on local to them, because they're told to care about the massive global things going on constantly. There's also a level of performance to it. It's performative to a degree, because people say, hey, do you not care about this? And what they want you to say is, of course I care about this. I'm doing this, 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 and this. Because if you're not doing something, then what does caring about it actually achieve? Fancy Cobra says, feels like there's been more of the normal amount of exhausting energy from the chat. Fancy Cobra, that is a great way of looking at it. Why do you think that is? I think the reason that there's been a greater amount of exhausting energy is because people think that their input and their advice is something that nobody else has considered. And everyone thinks this, which means that we simply have more viewers. We simply have more people who are watching. The problem that we have is this. Consider this. When you talk specifics, people chime in with, but what about generalities? And when you talk generalities, people chime in with, but what about specifics? Because people need to put input. People want to feel heard. People need to give their perspective. People need to add their ideas. And if you are talking about generalities, or, larger, zoomed out, blue sky thinking ideas, people want to know how that idea affects a specific situation they can think about, which is quite draining because you're answering thousands of specifics then. And if you're talking about a really specific situation, then people who are watching want to know how that situation fits into the general overall vibe, which means that you're then answering thousands of questions about generalities. This is the first time I was in your chat. You seem to enjoy streaming, but the last 10 streams or so I've seen you genuinely seem sick of chat's antics. I don't see chat as a monolith. You are all individual people, you all have your own ideas, and every single person deserves at least a base level of human respect. And so when people do chime in with inputs, most other people will say, oh, they're just trolling. No, they're not. People aren't just trolling. People genuinely do have that as an input. They genuinely are concerned. Which is why I think those people do at least deserve on some level a reply. Because, this might sound harsh, if they're asking a Twitch streamer for input, chances are they haven't got that input from other places. Chances are they haven't had teachers answer questions in the way they needed them answered. Chances are they don't have a super supportive local friend group or local support network who are able to give them that information in a way that is relevant to them. This is normally where people ask questions when they do genuinely want them answered. And so my choice is ignore them, which is just going to drive people further and further away into whatever kind of ultimate extremist thing they end up doing. And when I say extremist, I don't mean, super violent. I mean that if people start to isolate themselves away from answers, they will gravitate toward groups and toward cultures that will give them answers at any cost, even if those answers are wrong. Or they just become isolated and internal and shrink back within to themselves. Which means that when people ask questions, I cannot simply assume it's a bad faith question. The reason that we have so many awkward underground subcultures that have effectively become mainstream is because those subcultures prey off promising answers to people who haven't been given answers in a way that they've tried. So when people come and ask questions, yeah, you know what? It's bloody draining to answer the same question again and again and again. But sometimes I do need to remind myself, this may be the 1,000th time I've answered this, but it's the first time this person's asked it. In their mind, it's not irritating. It's not annoying. Try and consider it this. Imagine you're having a conversation with a child and the child asks a question and you answer it. That's fine. The child then leaves. Another child enters and asks the same question. You answer again and they leave. A third child enters. They ask the same question. After 10, 20, 30, 40, you might get irritated at answering the same question again and again and again. But it's the first time any individual person who is asking it has asked it. Which means, is it fair to get annoyed at that person when in their mind, it's the first time you've had the conversation, despite the fact it's not the first time you've actually had the conversation? Which is why sometimes you have to remind yourself, I've answered this question 100 times, but they've only asked it once. So yes, it is a huge amount of effort, and I think the reason that we're answering the same questions more often is because World of Warcraft does appeal to the type of player who likes sitting inside for a long amount of time. MMORPGs in general appeal to a hardcore market demographic who do tend to isolate themselves away. There's no way we can deny that. Yes, there are lots of casual players, but we're talking about the hardcore. Which is harsh but fair. I'm not saying that's a negative, I'm saying that's the people that we have to deal with. Yeah, not everyone has a record of the conversation that we've had before. And I think what ends up happening is I say something like, it is impossible to care deeply about every problem in the world. And so you need to pick and choose what you do care about. And people here don't care about things. Which is absolutely not what I'm saying. I say we need to pick and choose what we do or don't care about. And some people chime in with, yeah, but you need to care about this. And someone else says, yeah, but you need to care about this. Someone else jumps in with, yeah, but you need to care about this. And that, ironically, kind of proves it. We've got a ton of people who all want everyone else to care about something that they care about. And everyone suddenly has to address the fact that other people want their care just as much. You have a limited amount of mental energy. And people chime in with a tiny specific thing of, yeah, but you need to care about this. No, you don't. That's the point. You don't need to. It would be nice, but you don't need to. And people often give these, that's a great way of putting it, WTW, they give a bad faith representation of the question that they hear. I say, human beings need to pick and choose about what they care about because you don't have unlimited mental capacity. And people say, oh, so you don't care about this, which makes you sound like a bad person. Oh, you don't care about this. You don't care about that. You don't care about the other. It's not that you don't care. It's that if you tried to care about everything, you would go mad. We have a limited time on this planet as well. That's a great way of putting it, which means you have to very much pick and choose what you think you are going to be the champion of. Can you, as a human being, be aware of something negative and not care? Can you do it? Because it sounds harsh, but I can. I can be aware of bad stuff going on and decide that I have a limited amount of mental bandwidth, limited amount of focus. I am unable to affect this specific thing, and therefore it does not exist within my world. Emmett, that is a great sentence. How much misery can you sift through caring about everything? Sticky, that's a great way of looking at it as well. If we cared about every large-scale disaster as much and as intensely as we care about all of our close friends and family, then any large-scale disaster would be almost, so mentally destructive that we just can't deal with it. And I think that what we end up facing is, this is going to sound really, really reductive, and this is going to sound offensive, but you need to allow me to explain it. I think we often end up, without realizing, dealing with people who are mentally idealistic children. And that does not mean that they are physically young. You can be an idealistic child at 30 years old. But when we talk about dealing with idealistic children, any possible negative of the situation is seen as a bad thing. So someone says, oh my God, this bad thing is happening, we must go and help them. And we turn around and go, we can't help them without damaging and risking ourselves. It is not a clever thing to do. It is not a good idea. We must do this, this, and this instead. That's far more beneficial. They go, oh no, that's heartless. We need to go and do this. No. If you see someone drowning, the worst thing you could do is jump in to try and save them. Because unless you know what you are doing, you are putting yourself and them at more risk. You throw in a flotation device. If you absolutely know what you are doing, if you are a trained lifeguard, then you will probably know the most dangerous thing you could do is jump in to try and help them. It is remarkably important to know that simply using idealistic helping is not always the best idea. And when I say that we are dealing with idealistic children, we need to occasionally remove the immediate emotional reaction to a situation to work out the best way to actually help that situation. People hear about negative stuff and think the first thing they need to do is throw themselves wholeheartedly into fixing it. Not the way we do it. Not a good idea. So basically, try to achieve idealistic goals with realistic strategies. Scar, that's a good way of putting it. Idealistic goals, realistic strategies, is the best way that we can combine all of this together. And I think sometimes whenever I talk about slightly more philosophical or psychological concepts on this stream, we have quite a large selection of idealistic people who hear me saying, hey, don't sacrifice yourself to save others. And what they hear is, oh, so I shouldn't save others. No. You can have empathy. But performative, destructive empathy does not help. It can be hard to understand when people, because people are emotional creatures, we all are. And it can be very hard to process the idea of, hey, this is terrible right now, but worrying about it and crying about it and, wailing about it and letting it mentally destroy me isn't going to fix this. Empathy is great. Empathy at the cost of actual help, not great. Idealists need realists to ground them. The problem is that idealists see realists as negative people. Idealists think that realists hate everything. They don't. We're trying to work out what we can actually do. So when I use the phrase idealistic children, I guess I should mean idealistic and naive. I agree with that as well, achromatic. The ideal that we actually have a hell of a lot of systems in place that people pretend to be idealistic with or realistic with, that they're just using to abuse and collect their own, collect money for themselves. Absolutely. I mean, do you guys have any experience with people who get annoyed at you for not being idealistic, but then you're also annoyed at them for not being realistic? Because I've met far too many people who posit themselves as just being the right thing to do, without understanding that actually they're not doing the right thing, they're doing performative suffering. You see it in pretty much every university campus whenever any world event is happening, and they decide that they must fix this. It's a tad more complicated. You can fix local things, and you can absolutely, send as much support as you can to global things. But doing it for everything means you burn yourself out too quickly. People often do what they can which makes them feel good as well. People do get backlash for approaching things realistically instead of idealistically because the ideologues think that you just don't like the thing as much as they do. In one of your streams, you point to the article 6 Harsh Truths That Will Make You a Better Person, and reading it helped me in about. I'm really glad. Thank you, Nothing to Watch. That's excellent to know. It's a good article. I'll read it on stream at some point. Yes, if any of you guys want to read a good article, I would recommend the article 6 Harsh Truths That Will Make You a Better Person. Do you think this is related to the way people tell you how to do things in WoW? Like they have the idealistic way they think you should do it. When people tell me how to do nostalgia is a form of advice. That's what is really important to remember. When people have, or advice is a form of nostalgia. Both ways work. When people give you advice, they are using information that they have and experiences that they've had to hopefully help me out. People want me to like WoW, which means they want me to avoid things that I would dislike. So they tell me to do things in a way that, in their mind, avoids dislike. They give me advice that will hopefully jump past the bad bits. They will jump past the negativity. They will avoid the problems that I will eventually end up facing. But people tend to forget that it's the overcoming of those problems that create the connection to the situation itself. It's the process. It's the failures and the repeat and the attempt. When people give me advice and tell me how to play, they want to create a situation where I like the game. But they're doing it by removing the challenge, by removing the journey. They're doing it by saying, hey, eventually you're going to get to a point where you make this choice. So why don't you just make this choice right now? And I say to them, because I want to understand why I'm making that choice. I want to understand what situation I have experienced, which is the situation you will have experienced, that makes me ultimately think this is the right choice. People can give me advice which, in their mind, is going to keep me around WoW. Unrequested advice is criticism. If someone just jumps into the stream and says, you should be using more action bars, that is a critique of the way that I'm currently playing, because what they are implying is that the amount of action bars I'm currently using is wrong. What they mean is, if we're going to give this a good faith interpretation, there are more abilities that you want to have easy access to. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to allow yourself to have access to more action bars. You can do that by doing this, this, and this, which means that you now increase the complexity of the character that you're playing. I get that. I totally get that. But what they're saying is, you're playing the game wrong if you don't have more action bars. And it's critique. The problem is you'll never see why it's the right choice, because most people will give you advice, have never experienced the game directly, and they've read a guide. They've been told it's the right choice for whatever reason. And they believe that. Let's just say it like this. We would have to have a chat if you were underperforming in a raid where everyone else is trying their best. I understand that, but we aren't at that point yet. People giving me advice on how to play the end game is almost like a black belt 5th Dan taking a brand new blue belt to the side and say, hey, just so you know, when you go in for competitive ultra, sparring stuff, you need to be doing this, 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 and this. I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. When we get to that point, we will have that conversation. But until we get to that point, you are giving me advice way beyond where I currently am. We do not need that advice yet. And pacing out when and how you give specific advice is part of the teaching process. Yeah, they're giving their idealistic way to play. Of course they are. People want to give good advice. Sometimes friends of mine ask me for my input on stuff, and I have to say to them directly, do you want me to give critique, or do you want me to say nice things? People tell you to use something because it doesn't generate threat, have never actually read the abilities, they just read a guide and think it does that. Everyone has different levels of input. The question we have to ask ourselves is, are we completing the content? If we are completing the content, we are doing fine. Everyone thinks they're an above average driver. Everyone thinks they're a better parent. Everyone thinks they are a better player than everyone else. Or at least above average. World of Warcraft will get difficult when we take on the more difficult, complicated things. This team is going well. It's a smooth run. If I need to increase DPS because the team is saying, hey Josh, your DPS is too low, then I'll start Sweatlord focusing. But until then, don't think we need to do that. If someone wants to tell me what to do, that's fine, but if someone explains the reason for me doing it, that's also fine. And then they have to accept that at some point I will just say, no, I'm not doing that. Remember guys, if I really wanted to focus on playing well, I wouldn't be streaming. And I will at some point focus on playing well. Finding people that you want to play the game with is much more important than finding people who are really good at the game. The best tank is one who shows up and doesn't die. That's it. That's just straight up it. If a tank shows up and doesn't die, they are the best tank you will find. If someone makes running the game with them just straight up miserable, does not matter how good they are at the game. And if you ever doubt this, ask yourself a question. Would you rather work with someone that you hate working with, who is a 10 out of 10 at whatever they do, or someone that you love working with, who is a 9 out of 10 at their job? I promise most people, if you have to work with someone, will choose someone who is pleasant to work with and good enough, as opposed to someone who is unpleasant to work with and absolutely incredible. Because being unpleasant to work with ends up grating on you far more than anything else would. And I'm sure some of you will say, it depends on the job. Notice what's just happened. Some people in the chat have said it depends on the job. You know how earlier I said that when I talk about generalities, people ask about specifics, and when I talk about specifics, people ask about generalities? I asked the general question of, would you rather work with someone who is amazing but horrible to work with, or someone who is not quite as amazing but great to work with? And straight away, people started asking about specifics. I posed a general question, and people immediately asked for specifics within that. But what about suddenly started to happen? But what about if your job was really important? But what about if your job wasn't important? It's fun to dive into specifics. It is, but I don't think those specifics are always asked with the best intentions. I think they're normally asked as a whataboutism. I think most people, in most situations, we're not talking about running some kind of super secret underground nuclear bunker. We're not talking about doing something super over the top complicated. Most people, if given the choice between working with someone they like who is good enough or someone they don't like who is the best, they're going to want to work with someone who they like who is good enough. But what about when they are not? Then that doesn't match up from what I said, does it? Given enough time, players will optimize the fun out of a game. And sometimes you have to occasionally ask yourself, why are we playing this again? And sometimes the answer is, because it's fun. Yeah, they could optimize their game. But again, and I understand this, people seem to think that when I say I'm playing casually, what I mean is I'm going to sabotage someone else's gameplay. Of course I'm not. I'm aware that if we go into a hardcore raid, there are expectations of me. And if I go into the hardcore raid, some of those expectations will be understanding what my abilities do, understanding my responsibilities within the game, understanding what I need to do to be part of a good team. That's fine. And I will do that. I will follow those expectations. I will meet those expectations. What would be my solution to prevent MMOs and other games dying from min-maxing? You can't do that. You can't prevent how players want to play. If a game has a mechanical, mathematical system behind the aesthetic and the graphical facade, which all video games do, people will want to know what those numbers are, and people will want to know how to make those numbers as high as possible. If your video game is based on finding a numerical advantage over an enemy, people will find the highest advantage. They just will. You can't prevent that. The only way that you can prevent that is by constantly randomizing the experience that your players are having, and people don't like that. People want the numbers. People want to start new games and attempt to find the high number things again. People like that. At some point you have to ask yourself, why are you designing the game that appeals to a certain subset of players to not appeal to that subset of players? If you make an MMORPG and a load of people who like min-maxing games start playing it, you have created a game for people who like min-maxing things. Why would you then sit back and say, hey, we have a bunch of people that really like our game, let's make them not like it? At what point do you look at the player base you have and say, why don't we make the game appeal to this player base? If they want to min-max it, let them try. I was having a conversation years ago with Chris Wilson, the guy behind Path of Exile. And I said to him, Chris, when someone opens up the sphere grid in Path of Exile, the point, the leveling system, the forest, if you will, it's not really a skill tree, it's a skill forest at that point. That's a really intimidating moment. Have you ever thought about changing how that's presented to a new player in order to reduce the amount of intimidation they feel? Have you thought about maybe starting with it zoomed in? Have you thought about starting with it in simplified mode, so a player can then manually choose if they want to click into the more complex version? And he said to me, no, I haven't thought about that. Because if we were to do that, what we would be doing is hiding one of the most complicated aspects from our player base early on. What Chris wanted was players who opened that up and got excited. That's what he wants. He doesn't want people to have to be introduced slowly and steadily to that. He wants a player base that open that up and go, oh my God, yes, I'm so excited. This is what we want. This is it. He knew that's the player base that game appealed to. And instead of trying to mitigate the damage that that was doing to the player base, he wanted to put it front and center to increase the benefits that that was presenting to the player base. Which was great, because he realized that was what people were staying around for. That's what people liked. And so it wasn't a case of, hey, we're going to put a couple of people off. It was a case of a couple of people are going to fall in love with this. And that's more important to him. So when people say, you know, how do we stop MMORPGs min-maxing? The first question is, why do you want to stop this? When you have a genre that has thrived off it, why do you want to stop it?